Welcome to the Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs podcast, a place for podcasters to learn what's actually working in the world of podcasting and how to use their podcast to generate consistent leads in their business. I'm your host, Jenny, and I'm so excited you're here. Hey, Savvies, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. So in today's episode, we're going to be chatting all about podcast sponsorships and if they will be a good fit for your specific podcast or not. So first up, let's quickly discuss what different podcast sponsorships are available out there. So there's a couple different options. We have affiliate marketing, traditional ad sponsorships, and self-sponsorship. Affiliate marketing isn't technically an ad, but it gives you the opportunity to add that on. And it's a really easy kind of way to get into doing ads, but not having to worry about having sponsors and things like that. If you get accepted to the affiliate program, you can share about it as much as your heart desires. So I just wanted to include that in there, even though it's not like a traditional sponsorship. But the one we'll be diving into today is traditional sponsorship. So this means like ad segments from other companies, whether that is a digital product or a physical product or even a service. So if you're an avid podcast listener, I'm sure you're familiar with these kinds of ads. They're usually for a brand that you probably might already be familiar with to some extent, or heard it on another podcast maybe. And these are placed at the beginning of an episode, right before the content starts, in the middle of an episode, or at the end of an episode. Those are just the typical placements for podcast ads. And these typically aren't the way I recommend to make money from your podcast as an online entrepreneur. I think it can work great for other people, but as an online entrepreneur, it's just not my favorite way. And here's why. So I'm going to share 4 reasons. So first up, they usually don't pay much unless you have high downloads. So according to Castos, podcast sponsorships typically run anywhere from $18 to $15 costs per milli, which means costs per 1,000 downloads. So pre-roll ads run at the beginning of the show, like I said, and they're usually about 15 to 30 seconds. Post-roll ads run at the end, and they're also around 15 to 30 seconds. And these are typically worth the same to advertisers if they request a post or pre-roll ad, those are going to be around the same price. And then the mid-roll ads, though, these can command a little more money because your audience is less likely to skip over an ad if it's in the middle of an episode because they're already engaged in listening to the episode. They're not really going to pull out their phone and skip it or things like that. So that is something to keep in mind if you're okay with $18 to $50 per 1,000 downloads. So if your show has 1,000 downloads, you would either be making anywhere between 18 and 50. If your show has about 2,000 downloads per episode, then that would be doubled. But really, it's just unless you have high downloads, it doesn't pay much. And on the other side of things, obviously you need high downloads for it to be lucrative anyway. So a lot of advertisers require at least 1,000 downloads per episode within a 30-day period. So if you're not getting that, then it will be really tough to find sponsors unless it's like a really niche offering that makes perfect sense for your podcast. So it's one of those things, you either have 1,000 plus downloads per episode within a 30-day period, or you have less downloads, but you can find like a really niche sponsor. It's still probably not going to pay that much money, but at least it is really aligned with what you're offering and they're able to come down even though you have less than 1,000 downloads. So those are 2 of the kind of reasons why I don't recommend making money from your podcast in terms of traditional ad sponsorships. Hey there, I just wanted to briefly pause this episode to tell you a little bit about my free masterclass called How to Make Money from Your Podcast Without Relying on Ad Sponsorships. So if you've been listening to this episode, you know that traditional ad sponsorships aren't for everyone. Especially, I don't think they're for entrepreneurs. So I want to share the number one way business owners can make money from their podcast without having to worry about those big download numbers and still making pennies on the dollar, basically. So to watch the free masterclass, head over to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com/free and sign up, and let's get back into the episode. So you also, when you have traditional ad sponsorships, you also have little control or creative freedom of how the content is shared with your audience. So some companies may want you to read a script, others let you go with the flow a little more, but this really is going to depend on the company that you're working with. There are definitely going to be certain points that they want you to touch on no matter what. So that's just something to keep in mind because as business owners, as entrepreneurs, I know it's important for us to keep an integrity and only share about things that make sense to us. So this is just something to keep in mind because we obviously enjoy creative freedom. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be an entrepreneur. So just wanted to throw that one out there. And then lastly, they can become annoying for your audience if the ads aren't something that your audience cares about. Because podcast sponsorships pay so little, you might feel like you need a bunch of ads in each episode for it to be worth it for you. But all that does is really just put a little bit of extra money in your pocket, but it annoys your listeners, which isn't good. It is so much better to have a good experience for your listeners and keep them coming back for more than add a couple extra dollars to your pocket, in my opinion. I'd much rather be retaining my listeners and having them excited and recommending my show to other people than getting a couple extra dollars in my pocket because I thought I needed to have a million ads per episode. Honestly, it's not going to help if you have 3 ads in your episode versus 1. It's going to be a little extra money, but it's really not going to be a good experience for your audience. So you need to keep that in mind as well if traditional sponsorships is something you're considering. So all in all, I think traditional podcast sponsorships can be really beneficial for those podcasters that have a huge audience, but I really don't think they're worth it for smaller podcasters and entrepreneurs that have a podcast and things like that. But I'd really love to know your thoughts on everything. If you are willing to share those with me, shoot me a DM at Jenny Suneson, so JennySuneson on Instagram, and let me know if you're currently running any ads, whether for other companies or self-sponsoring your show. What are you doing with your podcast? If you're not running ads at all, I want to know. Tell me. Like, let's chat about it. Hit me up in my DMs. I really am curious because I love chatting about this with you guys. So that is it for today's episode. If you want to check out the show notes for this episode, you can head to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com, and I will see you in the next episode.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast player like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher, and leave a review. You can find us at savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com and on Facebook at Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs and Instagram at Savvy Podcasting. Make sure to join our free Facebook community for podcasters by going to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com/community and join in on the exclusive community just for Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs listeners. I'll see you there.